Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, October 22nd. We will hear the presentation, Road Uses, Charging, and the Future of Transportation Funding. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the questions box located in your GoToWebinar tool panel. I'll try my best to help. For content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the questions box in your GoToWebinar tool panel. We will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And I would ask that you could help me out by letting me know who you want to answer the questions. That just helps me facilitate the Q&A in a timely manner. So again, type your questions in as you think of them, and we'll answer those during the Q&A. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2021. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we are sponsored by the Transportation Division of APA. So thanks to you for joining the consortium this year and for putting together this great panel. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our upcoming sessions. You can register for these in all of our sessions at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. We are actually starting to schedule some Wednesdays and Thursdays just to fit in more sessions by the end of the year. So be sure to check our webcast webpage often to register for the sessions, because I'm still adding them in. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing. You can log those credits by heading over to planning.org. You can log into your My APA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number, again, both of which can be found on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And if you're on social media, let's be friends. Like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important, up-to-date kind of information like date or time changes. I also post when there are new sessions available for you to register for, and also reminders of upcoming sessions for the week. We also record all of our sessions and post them onto our YouTube channel. So be sure to subscribe to our channel so that you get notified when I post a new video. And this one today is being recorded and will be posted. And when you jump on there, you'll see that we have well over 350 recordings for you to peruse. So be sure to subscribe to us. That is the end of my housekeeping items. Again, as you think of questions, type them in that chat box. We will, or the questions box, we'll get to those at the end during the Q&A. And with that, I am going to turn controls over to Jingjing Fernandez, who is going to kick us off, introduce everybody, and get the show on the road. So I am turning those controls over to you right now.
Thank you, Christine. Good morning. Wanted just to make sure we can see, everybody can see the PowerPoint. Fantastic. Wanted to welcome everybody this morning. My name is Jingjing Fernandez, and we're going to be talking about the road usage charge and the future of transportation funding today. I'd like to introduce the other two panelists and speakers this morning. We've got Rima Griffith and Scott Errata. So I've been working for about 20 years in the transportation industry. I'm with CDM Smith, and for most of that time, I've been working on something to do with revenue, from transit fare cards to tolling, and for the last 5 years, road usage charge. I found revenue really drives a lot of what we're able to do. I've been supporting states with outreach planning and implementation pilots and testing systems and road usage charge. I want to also introduce Rima Griffith. Rima is the Executive Director of the Washington State Transportation Commission. which is a 7-member body appointed by the governor to serve as a public forum for statewide transportation policy, development, and planning. In this role, REMA works with commissioners, lawmakers, stakeholders, and the public on a variety of transportation policies and priorities. Prior to taking on this role in 2005, REMA spent many years serving as a senior policy and fiscal analyst for the State House and Senate Transportation Committees, and subsequently served as a senior policy advisor to the director of the State Department of Licensing. Scott Errata, as a federal program engineer for the Hawaii Department of Transportation, is responsible for receipt, obligation, and expenditure of federal highway funds. He provides financial oversight and recommends procedures and policies for federal aid finance. He also currently serves as a charge of the RUC West Steering Committee and is project manager for Hawaii's road usage charge demonstration project, Hierarch. Scott graduated from the University of Hawaii at Manoa in civil engineering. He's a licensed professional engineer and has over 35 years of combined administrative, transportation financing, civil design, construction, environmental engineering experience in government and private industry. So I'm going to start a little bit with just a little bit of background on what we're talking about today, why we're talking about it. The main issue is about stabilizing transportation revenue. As I mentioned, I've been working in this area for a long time, and it's really important. There's a lot of ways we do transportation revenue. Everything from transit fares. There's also, I worked in tolling, so tolling particular roadways to finance the road and construction or the corridor. The one we're talking about today is road usage charge. And the reason that we're talking about road usage charge is because of the fact that we actually, our largest source of revenue has actually been, for highway funding, has been the gas tax historically. However, as you can see in this chart, there's a lot of electric vehicles coming on board. The penetration rate and market adoption has been increasing really quickly over the last 5 to 10 years. Not only are there newcomer automakers like Tesla and Rivian who are all electronic, once they made a splash, legacy automakers have announced major shifts toward all electronic and hybrid lineups. In just January, General Motors, the country's second largest automaker and the world's 6th largest, announced it would only manufacture electric vehicles beginning in 2035. And that's including Hummer, who's already all electronic. Cadillac followed, and then also Honda will phase out all their gasoline cars by 2040, and are pledging, many of these companies are pledging to be all electronic soon. So this is being driven by governments placing regulatory demands on automakers. And so it's not limited just to electric vehicles, but things like the corporate average fuel economy or CAFE standards in the United States. And then there's outright bans on the sale of new combustion engine vehicles in other countries like Asia, Europe, and North America. So it's not only this, but there's also consumer preferences. Consumers are starting to shift and faster towards all electronic vehicles. In some places, it's year-on-year doubling of the number of electric vehicles that are being sold. And these are for reasons of saving money, environmental reasons, and then just the benefits, how quiet the vehicles are. All of these are starting to make it so that the default for a lot of people when they actually go out to look for vehicles is electric. So one of the things in terms of this impact is the electric vehicles and also the high fuel efficiency vehicles are paying nothing or very little in gas taxes. So a lot of the states have been looking at imposing flat fees on electric vehicles and plug-in electric vehicles. These flat fees range from $50 to $250, and some states charge a different flat fee for electric vehicles versus plug-in electric vehicles. And so, for example, in Colorado, South Dakota, the fee is about $250 a year. In Hawaii, there's a state component of $50, and some of the counties have their own. And this goes up to $225 for a plug-in electric vehicle in Washington, Alabama, Arkansas, Ohio, all looking at electric vehicles and implementing them. Alternatively, a lot of states are exploring this other way of also bridging that gap that they're seeing from reduced revenues as gas tax consumption is flattening or dropping. This idea is based distance-based charge. So this is an idea, a different mechanism for stabilizing transportation funding, which preserves the concept behind the gas tax when it was first put in place of however much you drive, that's how much you actually put back into the system for road maintenance. It's a user-based payment concept that works for a lot of our tax structures. And so these additional fees often, along with the electric vehicle fees, are often directed right back into the state transportation fund. And in some cases, the electric vehicle fund goes to supplementing new electric vehicle infrastructure and such. This road usage charge has been discussed as something that goes right back into the state highway funds. And for example, here, Oregon was the first to start looking at road usage charge, and they actually have implemented a voluntary program for road usage charge, and now they're looking at expanding their road usage charge program. California, by 2035, because all new passenger cars must be zero emissions, have conducted 4 RUC demonstrations already. Utah has over 3,000 vehicles enrolled in the nation's 2nd operational program. Eastern Transportation Coalition is a group of states out on the east that have enacted the nation's 3rd operational system. And it's, Virginia has enacted the nation's 3rd operational system and is set to go live in July of 2022. Kansas and Ohio are the newest states to begin road usage charge and funded through the STSFA grant program. And also on the West Coast, you've got the RUC West, which is looking at interoperability demonstrations, RUC for autonomous vehicles. There's just a lot of activity and work there. So, however, let's see, what is road usage charge? In different parts of the state, of the country, there's a lot of different acronyms for road usage charge because everybody's still mostly in the exploratory phase. There's different names that have been used. So if you hear per mile fee or mileage tax, distance-based user fee, vehicle miles travel tax, MBUF, the mileage-based user fee, it's all referring to pretty much the same thing. It's a tax or fee collected from vehicle owners that's proportional to their consumption of the public roadway network. Now, although this has been studied for almost over a decade now, there's still, only 2 programs that are actually implemented in the United States. And the reason for that is because it can be a little touchy. When you talk about taxes, everybody sits up a little straighter and pays a little bit more attention when you're talking to them. So there's a lot of critical issues out there. Here's a list of a lot of the different issues all of these states have been exploring. Each of the states have, find what is most pertinent to their driving public and has been dealing with studies, looking at analysis, figuring out the best way to talk to people about the topic. And so it has really been moving forward through all of these studies. And that's what I'd like to share today. I'm going to pass it on to Rima to tell you a little bit more about what they're looking at in Washington. Here's Rima. Thank you.
Thanks, Jingjing. It's great to be here today and to talk a little bit about the work that Washington State has been doing on road usage charging. We can go to the next slide. So in our state, we always start with the problem statement on just about everything. We start peeling the onion back, so to speak, with our lawmakers. And back in 2011, we reached out to our legislators as a transportation commission and started raising concerns about the long-term sustainability of the gas tax. So the problem statement was to the legislature and to the public that we know taxing fuel is no longer going to be a reliable, equitable source of funding. Next slide, please. This chart was presented to our lawmakers and is really what got our state going on assessing road usage charging as a potential replacement to the gas tax. We took our state's current average MPG, noted here on the left, at 20.5 miles per gallon. The red line below shows the RUC rate equivalent to our current gas tax, which is at 49.4 cents per gallon in our state. We expect, or at least our state forecasters expect that MPG to go up to 30 miles per gallon by 2035. We think that's a conservative estimate, but it's an official one, so we go with it. And even at that conservative estimation, that equates to about a 42% decline on a cents per mile basis in our revenues for our highways. That was not an insignificant problem and certainly got the attention of lawmakers to begin exploring alternatives to the gas tax. Next slide. One of the other issues we know about the gas tax today is that it does have fairness and equity challenges. The gas tax is fair because when it was originally construed, it was based on a very simple principle: user pay, user benefits. However, as the adoption of EVs and hybrids and just more fuel-efficient gas-powered vehicles have come onto the market, we've been slowly shifting to a situation where some users are paying and all users are benefiting type model. RUC really returns us back to that user pay, user benefit principle. The chart to the right here indicates, you'll see a yellow dot there where the arrow's pointing. That's our where we are today in Washington State at our 20.5 mile per gallon average. That equates to 2.4 cents a mile that drivers are paying today to use our roadways and gas tax at that MPG. Cars that fall in that blue quadrant to the left that are getting below that average MPG could be paying as much as 4 to 6 cents a mile today in gas taxes to use the roads. Meanwhile, vehicles that fall in that green quadrant that may be getting more than 20 miles per gallon could be paying as little as a penny a mile to use those same roads. So clearly, the amount that we're all paying to support our highway system is varied by the type of car that we're driving. Next slide. One of the questions we've gotten through our work in assessing road charging is, why can't we just keep raising the gas tax? It's still viable. People are still buying a lot of gas. So that's a fair point. But we did do an analysis to assess that. And we know that in order for the gas tax to continue generating the current level of revenue that it is today in our state, the gas tax would need to be increased by 1.7 cents per gallon every year through 2040. That is not insignificant, and this chart shows the culmination, or accumulation, I should say, of that kind of incremental annual increase over time, where by 2040, drivers could be paying almost $1 a gallon in gas taxes. And while that just sounds intolerable in general, what that means over that same time frame is that we're also going to be witnessing a transition in our fleet of more people driving EVs. And so really what ends up happening is we shift that burden of that tax increase to those who are driving older vehicles who cannot afford to move into the new cars, or perhaps their lifestyle won't allow it. So you start limiting really who's getting a better deal and who isn't in terms of who's paying taxes for our roadways. Next slide. One of the other things we keep a close eye on is the transition to plug-in electric vehicles. And one of the forecasts we pay attention to is the Bloomberg forecast. This slide really just shows that from 2017 up through at least 2020 and now to 2022 is that we're seeing a definite increase in the pace, or the anticipated pace of this transition. Today, Bloomberg is forecasting that by 2022, we will see the crossover point where plug-in electrics become cheaper than gas-powered vehicles. That'll largely start, we expect, with the SUVs and the trucks and the crossover vehicles. But over time, through this decade, by the end of the decade, we will see almost all vehicles being at the same price point or less that are electric. So kind of taking away that hindrance today that may be there for folks who can't afford an EV, that's going to disappear over time. Next slide. So what is Washington State doing to advance RUC? We've been doing a lot of research, outreach, testing, and policy development for the last almost decade. Next slide, please. In 2012, our legislature directed the commission to assess road usage charging suitability as a sustainable long-term revenue source that could replace the gas tax. Some very important high-level parameters to our research throughout this work has been that during a transitionary period of moving from the gas tax to the road usage charge, drivers would only owe one or the other, but not both. noting that we don't anticipate a flip the switch kind of transition where one day we're paying gas tax and the next day we'd be paying road usage charging. We see it very much as a slow transition as the fleet transitions. To compare the gas tax against a road charge, we have analyzed and tested a per mile rate that is equivalent to our gas tax rate today of 49.4 cents a gallon. And you can see the math we've done there. The simple math gets us to 2.4 cents a mile, which is what we have focused on. And lastly, it's been a priority and a foundational policy of all our work that no matter how we advance road charging, drivers will need to have a choice for how their vehicle mileage is collected, reported, and paid. Next slide, please. So how would it work for Washington? Next slide, please. In Washington State, we conducted a year-long statewide test of road usage charging in 2018 through 2019, in which we had 2,000 test drivers from all over the state, helping us explore the various ways of collecting a road charge, and also giving us input on the real impacts that it was having on them and how easy it was to participate and what concerns they might have had through the process. We also did some cross-border testing. We had a sample or a group of drivers from the city of Surrey, British Columbia, noting that British Columbia is also considering and looking at a road usage charge. Given we have one of the busiest border crossings in the country, we wanted to understand what that could mean if two countries had road usage charge systems and how we might go about reconciling that, which is a lot more complex than perhaps trying to do so between states. We also had drivers from Idaho participate in our pilot, as well as drivers from Oregon, noting that Oregon does have an actual road usage charge program. And in that test, we had drivers paying real money and conducted our nation's first cash transactional test to see how the money literally would move between two states as we reconciled those dollars. Next slide, please. In the pilot, we tested 4 approaches to collecting miles. On the left side, those are basically approaches that do not involve the use of GPS. We deliberately wanted to test what we call manual approaches to collecting road charging, because we really wanted to be able to demonstrate that you could do a road usage charge program without GPS. To the bottom left there is the mileage permit. It's kind of like a prepaid cell phone where drivers could pre-select a block of miles, pay for them in a simulated way. We didn't collect real money in these cases. But then they were reporting their odometer electronically through an app, or they could do it in person every 3 months. And drivers were able to kind of watch their permit to make sure it didn't expire through those means. As you can see, only 1% of our test drivers selected that option. It was not very popular. But above it, which was very popular, was the odometer read. And this is really a post-pay approach for paying for your miles, where the drivers drove, and then on a quarterly basis in the pilot, they were asked to text in a picture of their odometer, or they could go to the Department of Licensing office and have it read manually by an employee. And they paid and got an invoice every quarter based on the actual miles driven. 28% of our drivers selected that option. To the right is where we started employing the use of technology and GPS. The Mile Mapper smartphone app was a beta app that we developed with some of our smart students at the University of Washington, and created an app that basically allowed drivers to turn the GPS on and off. So it was their choice, but either way, it was like an electronic meter collecting all the miles you were driving. It was a very popular option. We had to cap it at 14%. But it did prove to be quite useful and effective. It did have some challenges, like what if you forget your cell phone or there's multiple cell phones in the car. None of these are unsurmountable issues, but certainly things we learned in the test that will have to be dealt with in a real system. And lastly, in the bottom right, the plug-in device, which is currently in use in Utah and Oregon and is the most common collecting road charging. This meter, this electronic meter basically plugs into your vehicle's OBD2 port, and you can have it with GPS or without. We tested both. We had 37% of our drivers select it with GPS. 19% chose to do it without GPS. So what we've heard from our drivers is that basically we collected 15 million miles. We conducted 3 surveys, beginning, middle, and end of the pilot to get all their input. And some of the top concerns we heard, no surprise, was privacy, fairness and equity, and how we're going to be able to travel between states seamlessly. Next slide. Couple of key findings. We did a lot of surveying of our drivers. This one was interesting, where after the pilot, we learned that 68% of our drivers preferred RUC or preferred it equally to the gas tax. As you can see in that first bar, when we started the pilot, only 43% were supportive of RUC. So as you can see, really what this demonstrates is through real experience, people do come around to, I guess, and learn to support RUC and see it as a fair and more fair way approach to funding our highways and the gas tax, and that it wasn't really too hard to participate either. Next slide. We asked our participants what they would advise elected officials based on their experience in the pilot. 28% said move forward with a RUC as soon as possible, while 33% said to gradually phase it in over the next 5 to 10 years. So overall, 61% support from our 2,000 drivers for advancing RUC over the next decade. Again, demonstrating the importance of experience. So how can we protect privacy? Getting back to some of those key concerns that we heard from drivers. We know that system design and user choice as well as legal protections are going to be critical to providing that protection. Next slide. We know today in our state that the only new piece of information really that our Department of Licensing needs to get from drivers that they don't already collect through the vehicle registration process is total miles driven. We don't do an odometer read or safety checks in our state. So this would be one piece of data they would need. Drivers would get to decide though in our state how to report their miles, including whether or not to use GPS. Any mileage reporting method that uses location services would really be for the convenience of the consumer and not needed to run the system. Also, it'd be important to have enabling laws that provide protection around privacy and data in our state laws to make sure there are clear rules and regulations around the use of that data. So how would it impact rural and low-income drivers? And one thing we do know from our research is that it's what you drive, not how far you drive, that will determine the impact of RUC relative to gas tax. We know that rural and lower income households tend to drive lower MPG vehicles and therefore pay disproportionately more for roads under the gas tax. This map, while it's a little blurry, I think that the key points here are that all that green, whether dark or light, indicates, at least in our state, drivers would see an actual decrease in taxes paid for roadways. The orange and the red is where some drivers might see some increase in their taxes to pay for roadways, and that's largely due to the prevalence of electric vehicles. Next slide. When we look at vehicle by vehicle model and try to assess the impacts of road charging, just the tax alone, at a flat 1,000 miles per month, this chart demonstrates that you can see on the far left that 07 F-150 pickup truck that gets about 15 miles per gallon is actually going to see a reduction in taxes paid. Meanwhile, if you go across this continuum to that Prius, we've layered in our state's hybrid fee that they pay, and in that case they would see a slight increase, about $8 per month in taxes paid, as well as electric vehicles who currently pay $225 in our state for their electric vehicle registration fee. Right now, we're currently doing an assessment of potential impacts of road charging on low-income drivers. And one of the early findings that we have from our research so far is that the cost of road charging, or fuel tax for that matter, is a very small share of low-income household transportation expenses. Noting here in this chart that it represents about 4% of their costs. Interestingly, public transportation is about 7%, and insurance is about 15%, with fuel at 19%. And this really is just to put the context of a consideration around gas tax or road charging in the bigger scheme of costs that drivers have to pay and the effect it has on low-income households in terms of their budget. So how will RUC influence plug-in electric vehicle adoption? We know that RUC will hold most of them harmless, but rates can be discounted by lawmakers or by those administering the program. Today in our state, EV drivers pay $225 per year. And if all vehicles pay the same per mile rate in road charging, EV drivers still maintain a significant operating cost advantage, which this chart demonstrates. And in this chart, same vehicles as what you just saw in the prior chart, but we layered in the cost of fuel. So you can see that vehicle, that 2007 F-150 pickup truck, still has a significant expense due to the fuel costs that they must face, while the hybrid and of course the electric vehicle have very little operating costs. So that maintenance of that cost advantage continues, even with road charging in place. Will the cost to collect be worth the revenue gained? We know at scale, RUC will have similar cost of collection as vehicle fees, and the net revenue will outperform gas taxes over time. This chart really plots, kind of just for, again, context and perspective, that RUC at full scale could actually cost at or less than what it costs us today to collect an average vehicle registration fee, which is around 8 to 10% in our state. We know that the far left, that fuel tax cost of collection is never going to be, everything is going to cost more than the gas tax. But we do know that RUC can get its cost down through technology, through scale, and through continued research around how we can drive those costs down and bundling services with other services in the private sector to help us get those costs down for consumers and for taxpayers. Next slide. One of the questions we often get is, can we just index the gas tax? We know that indexing fuel tax does generate similar revenue as RUC, but again, by 2040, the proportion of taxpayers paying the gas tax is going to shrink, and that burden of payment shifts more to the low income and rural drivers. That bottom blue line really shows, at least in Washington State, what would happen to the gas tax if the lawmakers did nothing with it. So how can we avoid double taxing drivers? Next slide, please. We look at fuel taxes as a prepayment towards your RUC charges. And assuming that the fuel tax will stay in place during a transition, the fuel tax would be that prepayment, and drivers would just keep paying at the pump as they do today, and their RUC bill would reflect that credit. Other benefits of doing that is that it'll enable small incremental payments towards their RUC charges. It serves as a natural backstop against tax evasion, and it helps ensure that we can meet our legal requirements to the outstanding bonds that have been leveraged against the gas tax in our state. Next slide. So how will out-of-state drivers pay to use Washington roads? Well, until there's a national system in place, the gas tax needs to be kept in place to continue capturing that revenue at a cost-effective level. We know that only about 5 to 8% of our total VMT in our state is from out-of-state travel, so keeping it in place will be very important to allow for that seamless interstate travel. Next slide, please. How can the state get started with RUC? Well, we look at transitioning to RUC is a dial, not a switch, so very slow transition. The Transportation Commission issued a comprehensive report of findings in 2020 to our legislature and governor, and they plotted this basically a decade of transition. Assuming we started in 2021, we would start with plug-in electrics, hybrids, and our state-owned agency vehicle fleet. But about 5 years in, we would do a readiness assessment with the goal of by 2030 to 2031, we would extend it to all new passenger vehicles. There's legislation in place right now to support, and that debate continues in our legislature. Next slide. So we continue to research in Washington State while our lawmakers debate and contemplate enacting a road charge program in our state. Our current federally funded grant program is looking at a number of things, including creating a framework for modeling the effects of electric vehicles, AVs, and ride shares, or TNCs, and teleworking on our RUC system long term. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the equity analysis and potential impacts that RUC may have on underrepresented communities. We'll be doing an update on our mileage reporting methods and latest technologies, and working actively with our partner states on how we can reduce the cost of collection. We're also going to be issuing a detailed phase-in plan. We'll be doing some further testing next year, and we'll be issuing a roadmap, which will not only be for Washington State, but for other states, how other states can right-size their RUC policing system to fit their circumstance. This is our website where you can go to learn more about our work. There's a lot of information there, as well as our comprehensive report issued in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Rima. Now I'd like to introduce Scott Errata from Hawaii Department of Transportation.
Okay, thank you, Jing. Thank you, everybody. I would like to thank you folks for providing this opportunity for Hawaii to share what's happening as far as road usage charge here in Hawaii. And if you go to the next slide, I think for Hawaii, you know, a lot of you folks may think of Hawaii as a faraway, exotic location with hula dancers, nice weather, surf. Yep, I'm happy to say we have all that. But at the same time, you know, we have the same problem as everyone else, yeah, in different parts of the country. If you go to the next slide, Even for us in Hawaii, the MPG, the average MPG is increasing, as you can see in the left-hand graph. And as a result, on the right-hand side, the top line is our 16 cents per gallon state fuel tax. It has kind of leveled off, and it's actually starting to decline. So pre-COVID, we get about 83 million in the state gas tax. And what was our largest of the four main revenue component, it is now our second largest revenue component. So we got to do something about it. Yeah. Next slide. So our response was to do a road usage charge demonstration project called Hierarch. And if you can go to the next slide. So it was something which we looked at in 2016. We did a feasibility study. And that feasibility study showed promise of possibly doing a road usage charge in Hawaii. And for Hawaii, it is an interesting place to test a rock. For one thing, unlike Rima's presentation where you guys have interstate or even traffic from another country, well, for us in Hawaii, it's pretty simple. We don't have everyday interstate traffic, but we do have four major counties, each with a distinct county level tax rate. So there is, if each county does implement ROC, then there is some interoperability consideration for that too. We have the state gas tax, like I mentioned, and then layer on top of all that, the federal gas tax. Yeah, next slide. So why do we want to do a demonstration? Yeah. So demonstration would promote understanding, and it'll enable informed feedback from the public. So from a public standpoint, you satisfy their curiosity if you make them feel like they were involved, and actually you would involve them. And we feel that nothing can replace hands-on experience. So one of our saying is that let firsthand experience do the talking. One of the not so good thing that can happen is that somebody is spreading misinformation from secondhand, right? So we want people to experience it, and then based on the experience, they can spread the word and tell how they feel from that. For DOT, it's our chance to interact with the public, to understand how the public feel about it, and then we can use that to help build awareness and do public education and outreach. We can gauge reactions from the people, gather feedback, and as time goes on, what we think might be important as far as what we think how the public feels, we can adjust. We can take take the opportunity to relook and adjust those things as time go on. And I have another slide on that too. Next slide. So this is our Hierarch project. It's a 3-year project. It started back in late 2018. And so it's kind of broken into those 4 major areas, I guess you can see on there. The first part is our community outreach. We thought it was one of the most important part of the project. And in our project, it's a little bit different from a lot of the other pilots that have been done in the States, where we are actually engaging the general public and not so much recruited participant base. So in the first part, we did our public outreach campaign. We went out, we had community meetings, 14 of them on different islands. We did, surveys, we did focus group. We learned quite a bit from that. And the second part, in general, it's our driving report or a manual demonstration, where we mailed out, 359,000 of these mailers to the public that contain information on road usage charge. The next part is where the technology test drive and then the project kind of becomes similar to what other states have done, where we offer different type of mileage reporting methods to 2,000 little over 2,000 drivers that were recruited, and they could test it and provide their reaction. And on the right-hand side, this is where we're at now. We're at the tail end. We're doing all our report writing on our finding, what we saw, what we learned, how people felt, what could be possible options in Hawaii. And then it'll be all wrapped up in a final report that we hope to finish by the end of this calendar year. Okay. So public outreach. So it ranged from a real small group of people to mailing, 50,000 mailers out to people at a time. If you go to the next slide. So before the project started and before there was a lot of things out in the media and people were getting influenced, we conducted a series of focus group meetings. We had about 10 of them. It ranged from 8 to 10 people, where it provided a snapshot of how people felt on the different issues. And it was really interesting to hear what was said in the moderated discussion, not only responding to the questions we had, but amongst the participants themselves too. But some of the things we learned from the focus group is that they felt that we need to raise awareness of the problem, to the people, to help residents understand what transportation funding is and the long-term problem that we're facing. We need to clarify key points and messaging. Yeah, as far as, well, this is a road usage charge. It's a replacement tax. It's not a new tax or an additive tax. And then even things like when they found out that the average driver in Hawaii pays roughly $75 to $80 per year on the gas tax. And initially, some of the focus group members thought that they're paying in the thousands of dollars, per year. So that, changed the discussion quite a bit. So, so they felt that, well, we need to make it clear and we need to make sure people understand. Also, we need to make sure that it's fair for everyone. Everyone would pay some fair share. Mileage reporting and information storing is a non-issue. So, a lot of the members already knew that we're collecting odometer readings from an existing safety check that we do annually for, vehicles. So, it was not a big deal for them. And they felt that, well, if we did an outreach campaign with some type of a mailer, that'll be meaningful, but it had to contain individualized information, to the person who's receiving the mailer. Okay. Next slide. After a focus group, we did a telephone survey. We got about 1,500 completed survey, and it was to quantify what the focus group finding. We could actually measure perceptions of what people thought about road usage charge. We could gauge, get some sort of idea of support or opposition of a road usage charge, and then we could also identify messaging that will resonate with people either for or against road usage charge. Okay, next slide. Then we went out to the communities on all the different islands. We conducted 13 community or town hall meetings. This was our opportunity to talk to people. We could, after a meeting, have one-on-one conversation, things like that. It was really great to go out to hear directly from the people. We had over 300 attendees who actually signed in. But sometimes when you go to those meetings, some people don't want to sign in. So there were actually more than 300. The meetings range from a dozen people up to over 100 people. And we learned quite a bit from those meetings. And if you go to the next slide, as we were going out to those meetings, we went out to different communities, and we found out that each community had their own unique issue. Like, for example, on the island of Molokai, on West Oahu and Windward Oahu, those drivers tend to drive longer distance. I mean, yeah, it's relative to what you folks are used to on the mainland, but for people driving on the islands, more than 50 miles or so a day, that's long distance. But, they felt that long distance drivers would be unfairly affected. Other islands that receive a lot of tourists like Maui and Kauai, they felt that, well, maybe the tourists should pay a different RUC rate from the local people because they contribute to all the congestion and damage to the road. As far as incentivizing or disincentivizing EVs, that came up quite a bit. How does this affect that, and how does it cut across different policies, that are competing? So we heard that on different islands like Maui, Kauai, certain parts of Oahu, and of course, people will try to get around whatever you do. So on the Big Island, well, how will it be enforced? So great questions. We learned quite a bit from those meetings. We do have an annual vehicle inspection. We call it the safety check or personal vehicle inspection. So every year, if you have a vehicle, you have to take it in to have a inspection if it's over 2 years old. And what happens is that after your inspection, if it's deemed that it's in good working order, you get a sticker like shown on the right-hand side. That's good for a year. And if you don't do it, then you cannot renew your registration. But one of the important things that happens in this, that they collect your odometer reading. So if you take it in, annually more or less, then if you have that, then we can actually determine how many miles a person drove between the last two safety check. So it is a great way where, well, you have an existing system, existing process, people are already used to it. That's a great way to collect mileage. Knowing that, we went to our next phase where we were getting ready to mail out all these statements or mock invoice, or we call it driving reports, where it was going to go to hundreds of thousands of people. So knowing that we're going to send all this out at great effort, great cost, we want to make sure that people actually open the envelope when they receive it. It doesn't go straight to the junk mail pile. So we want to maximize the chance. Yeah. So what we did was we actually hired a firm in San Francisco. They flew down 2 people to 20 households, and then they watched them open up their mail. And mixed in the mail were several versions of our envelope. Some were colorful with nice pictures. Some were plain looking with just a DOT logo. And it was really interesting where, for me, I thought that having a logo for the project was important, but when people actually saw it, it was nice and colorful. They thought it was advertisement, so they were more inclined to, just put it in a junk mail. Or, we had comments like, boy, how come the DOT is spending a lot of money on this nice, colorful pictures? But in the end, the official, plain-looking official DOT logo, envelope with the logo, was the one that worked the best. And we did a similar process for the driving report where, we had different versions of the driving report. We asked the people what they thought about it, what they liked and what they didn't like. And if you go to the next slide, it shows how the driving report ended up being. Where the bottom line is that a lot of the people, even though we thought, them fully knowing and understanding the problem was important, when they actually received the driving report, the main thing was that they were interested, what's in it to them, how are they affected? So the way it end up the design was that as soon as you open it up, they saw those 2 numbers that you can see on the lower part. It shows a comparison between what they could be paying in a revenue neutral RUC and what they could be paying in the gas tax based on their year, make, model of the vehicle. And so, that captures their attention, that they see their name, they see their vehicle, they see the mileage that they drove between the safety check, and then the difference between a RUC and the gas tax. So you have 8 seconds to capture the attention of a person. And then we have a call to action where once they read all this, we want them to take a survey so that we can get a gauge of what they understand, how they feel about it, and all that. So initially, we provided a link that they could type in a URL into their computer and then take the survey, and the response rate was about 4 to 5%. But we wanted to increase the response rate, so we had some discussion about offering incentives and things like that. And in the end, what we decided was, well, what if we include a paper survey with a self-addressed return envelope? And when we did that, the response rate increased to the 13 to 15% range. So overall, we got an 11% response rate, which was really great for an unsolicited, mail. But I guess one of the takeaways is that don't underestimate the power of paper sometimes. You make it convenient for people, and you're more likely to get a response. Okay, next slide. So, for us in Hawaii, we can proudly say that we think we were the second state to actually get RUC revenue. So, of course, Oregon was first. When these statements went out, we actually got a check in the mail, $63. Even though we're telling people that this is just a study, so we had to, return the check to this nice gentleman. But yeah, we have compliant people in Hawaii. Next slide. The next part of the project is the technology test drive, where we offered different mileage reporting methods. So we had the OBD2 plug-in device with or without GPS, and we had the auto photo where you could take a picture of your odometer and upload it. A little over 2,000 vehicles were enrolled, and compliance rate was, almost up to 85%. So that was really great. One thing that we also did, in addition to enrolling people and testing this mileage reporting method, was we tried to get some fleets involved. Where what we found out was that a lot of the vehicles, for individual owners, it's quite different from fleet operators, because if you operate a fleet with 100 vehicles and you got to enroll it, for example, it becomes pretty onerous to enroll each vehicle individually. So what are some easier ways that can be done to accommodate fleets? So this is what this fleet focus pilot kind of went into a little bit. Okay, next slide. So what are some of the findings from our project? If you go to the next slide. So when the people got their driving reports and they did the survey and they filled it out, and so one of the questions that we asked was, well, what do you think? What's your reaction to this idea of a road usage charge? And on the left-hand side, as far as the non-electric vehicle respondents, almost 48% expressed some level of support. And on the right-hand side, you have a similar graph for electric vehicle drivers, and you notice it's a little bit lower. But that was really surprising for us in Hawaii, because when we compare these numbers against to the average in the US from other pilots, I think the other pilots were in the 22 to 23% acceptance range. Okay, next slide. We also asked questions as far as what would move the needle for acceptance factors. So if people knew that the road usage charge collected will go toward roads and bridges, then they were more apt to support it. So on this graph, the further to the right you go, indicates a higher level of support, and the more left you go, it's opposition. So for example, the second one, rental car paying a different or a higher RUC rate, that generated pretty good acceptance rate. For the first 1,000 miles per year, if you do a flat rate and then you do per mile after that, that also provided some level of support. But then if you notice the fourth one, well, what about electric vehicles only paying RUC? As you can see, well, non-electric vehicles, they supported it, but the electric vehicle respondents, were opposed to it. So anyway, it was, really interesting to see the response. Some of it, was kind of anticipated. As far as the driving report, we asked the question about how do you want to report your mileage? And a lot of the people felt that, well, just keep on doing it how you always done, the safety check method. So, of course, for people, people don't like change. In this case, if they're already doing it, there's no additional work for them. They're already familiar with it. Well, the government is already collecting my mileage and they have all my information. So it wasn't really a great concern for them. And of course, the most convenient. Yep. And then on the two, bubbles on the right shows the other choices that they indicated. Okay, next slide. Payment frequency. So this came up quite a bit in the public meetings, and so people felt that, well, if you're at the pump and you're paying, you're buying gas, you're paying a little bit at a time, but in a road usage charge, how are they expected to pay? Because even if it's the average is $80 for Hawaii, but if they pay it along with the registration fee and all that, it could add up, to be quite a bit of money and be difficult for, especially the lower income households to pay at one time. But roughly half felt like, they want to pay it all at once, and then the other, half, they felt like, well, we should offer maybe 4 payments quarterly or monthly options. So you need to provide options to people. Okay, next slide. Technology test drive. This was also kind of interesting, where on the top 2 lines, it shows what methods, when we had the 2,000 people participate, these were the methods that the people signed up for. So roughly 60% of electric and non-electric vehicles chose the autophoto method. And then 32% chose the plug-in device with GPS, and then the right-hand side is the GPS with, the plug-in device without GPS. Compared to other pilots that we got data on in the States, it seemed like the plug-in GPS was the one that the people chose the most. So that was what people chose, and after they experience the technology test drive, then we asked, well, how do you want to report mileage after having experienced all this? And then we did include also the annual safety check. And so that became the most popular choice. Over 40% of the people felt like just collect it at the annual safety check, but then other people, chose the auto photo and the plug-in device with GPS. So it seems like, yeah, convenience is a factor in all this. Okay, next slide. During the technology test drive, we had different surveys at the beginning, the middle, and at the end, and we tried to gauge as time goes on, how do people feel and what changes. So from the graph, you can see that as far as level of support over time, it increased. So it seems like that as people got to experience and understand ROC better, then that actually increased the acceptance rate. And on the right-hand side, initially there was quite a bit of people who were unsure, but as they got experience, then you see that level of unsureness went down. So we think that people got a better understanding of road usage charge. Okay, next slide. We ask, well, what should be the next step? Kind of similar to what Rima had shown in her presentation, we asked similar question. And as you can see, the top three bars, people do feel that, well, at some point, we should do something, move forward with a road usage charge in some form, whether you do it immediately or you gradually implement it over time, or maybe you apply it to certain type of vehicles first. So, that's a result that we got. Next slide. Okay, next step. So as far as what we're doing now, having completed all, the demonstration, we're, of course, cost of collection is something that's important. It's a lot of the people in the focus group, it came out in the community meetings, and of course, policymaker and legislators are all interested in it. So as far as the gas tax, the cost of collection is, low, between less than 1% to 3%. In Hawaii, if we're to leverage the existing safety check process and system, and we use the DMV data, we think that we might be able to fall within this 2 to 4% range. And right now we're still crunching the numbers, but that's what, preliminarily it's coming out to be. Then on the other end of the spectrum, as far as doing all this plug-in device and getting an account manager and things like that, it may likely fall within the 15 to 25% range. So that's just, so we feel that, well, we have a, why not leverage it? Yeah, it's a great advantage, and even for other states that might have a similar safety check program, or even if you have like a vehicle emissions program, like especially in states like with more populated county, like for example Nevada, you got 2 counties that account for probably 87 or 88% of the population in Clark and Washoe County, with a annual emission inspection. Maybe this could be something that could be done similarly. Yeah. Okay, next slide. So right now we're in the final stage of the project. We in the 2016 feasibility study, we identified topic areas that we thought were important, and at that time it did involve different stakeholders. We came up with a list, and then as we went out to the different public meetings, we got input throughout the project by different means. Then we relooked at that list, and some of them actually changed. Yeah, what we thought was important maybe was not as important. For example, like privacy. We thought that was very important, but then as we went out, and then people said, well, you're already collecting my odometer, and you already have my information, so it wasn't as important. So certain things fell out. So the bottom is what we ended up being as far as the prioritized list after public input, and we're writing our different policy papers to address those areas. And in the end, it'll be all wrapped up in our final report, and we hope to finish that by the end of December this year. Okay, next slide. Yep. So yeah, so that pretty much concludes my presentation. If you're interested in our project, we do have a website up, hierarch.org. Feel free to take a look at it, and if you have any questions in the future, and I would be happy to answer them, and my email contact address is shown up there. So thank you very much, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Okay, let's jump into some questions here for a few minutes. Okay, if you have questions, just type them in the chat box and we'll do our best to get to them. So the first question is for Rima. First, hold on. Can we please post the Washington State website for more info that was on the last slide, Rima, of your presentation?
Yes.
Right. All right, great.
We welcome that.
All right. Let me get back to my questions box here. All right. In reporting miles traveled by photograph of the odometer in Washington State, what safeguards are in place to prevent odometer tampering to evade taxes? Will odometer readings be taken at sale of used vehicles as a snapshot? How does all this work?
Well, yeah, so in terms of how do we ensure it's not tampered, I mean, we've done the testing in a pilot, so kind of caveating that we didn't have all the rigors of security that you would have in a real system and invest in. But using the software that we used and the app that we used for the auto photo, basically what we learned was that a photo of one's dashboard is like a fingerprint for that vehicle. There are very subtle differences between the appearance of, say, an odometer or the speedometer of one model of a Volvo, for example, versus another. And those very little nuancical changes are analyzed through a database and a system that help us ensure that, for example, if I drive a car a lot and my mom doesn't drive her car ever and I want to take a picture of her odometer and her car's a Buick and mine is a Toyota, the system would catch it. And we actually had a couple of people try to game the system in our pilot, even though it wasn't, again, the rigor of security we would do in a real system, we caught it. And so definitely that is something we have to continue to pay attention to for sure. And then in terms of, trading in vehicles, buying new vehicles, there's a lot of interaction that we will need to develop in a real system with auto sales, with the different car lots, to make sure that we're taking advantage, if you will, of those opportunities to capture odometer readings at the point of sale. And that's something we continue to explore right now, actually, with the state of Oregon.
Thank you. What's to prevent someone from unplugging their plug-in GPS device when they want to evade paying a road use charge? Is there a way to audit their mileage through periodic odometer checks? All these curious questions we have.
Well, I know from our side, our experience was if someone unplugged that device from the OBD2 port, it sent a signal to our account managers. So we knew pretty quickly if it had been disengaged and when it was re-engaged. So I guess technology kind of helped solve some of that problem. I don't know, Scott or Jingjing, if you have anything to add, but that's kind of how we were able to monitor it.
Yeah, same
Sure.
for Hawaii, where I actually had one plugged into my car as part of the demonstration, and just to see what happens if different things happen. So if it was unplugged, they mailed it to me, and I was busy. I didn't plug it in for a while, and then I got a notice, hey, you better plug in your device. And so there's ways that it can be monitored and things like that. So yeah.
Definitely, I think it is a compliance issue, even for people that aren't trying to cheat the system. That onboard device plug is actually used. The original purpose was for emissions testing and troubleshooting your vehicle. So a lot of people, when they went to the mechanic will unplug the device. And so then, especially if it takes a couple days to fix the vehicle or the mechanic doesn't plug it back in, the device might end up going unplugged for a little while. And so to be helpful, the account manager that's running the system and monitoring all of the accounts will remind people, gently at first, and then if it's been going on for a little while, then heighten the urgency a little bit. Hey, you need to plug in your device. We haven't gotten any mileage readings from you for a while. all of that. And then at the end of the, for example, the reporting quarter or period, they could end up showing up as non-compliant if it never got plugged in during the period. And that can also happen because of the cell phone connection for the devices if somebody's parked underground. So if they come out every day or using the vehicle on a weekly basis, not a problem. However, if they park their vehicle, go on vacation, and the vehicle's, underground, you can also not get a signal. So there's a lot of ways to work around the technology. It's just being as customer friendly as possible as you're doing that.
Thank you. Let's talk about heavy vehicles for a moment. Scott, I think you mentioned this as something that you're discussing in the future about perhaps the weight of vehicles. We know that the heavier a vehicle is, the more wear and tear on the road. Is there consideration for recouping additional road damage associated with larger vehicles? I know here in Ohio we have a lot of weigh stations, just to ensure that trucks aren't too heavy and aren't messing up our roads. So is there something related to that that can be implemented to try to recoup some of that damage, I guess?
Yeah, great question. It has come up quite a bit. Intuitively, when people look at it, the heavier the vehicle, of course, they think it's going to damage the road more. But for us in Hawaii, we decided to focus more on the light duty truck and passenger car because that is the segment that's changing the quickest. But as far as the heavy trucks, as part of our project, we do have advisory group that do represent the heavy truckers, and so we do have an ongoing conversation with that as far as we have this problem with the gas tax or fuel tax, and then in the long run something needs to be done. But as far as looking at a different type of tax or rate, like a weight mile or something like that, as far as our project, we're not including that particular piece in. Yeah, but it's a discussion that we're having with the doctors here in Hawaii.
Yeah, it's in Washington State. We have, every time our legislature has raised the gas tax, they've raised the weight fees on heavy vehicles over 10,000 pounds to the tune of about 15%. So while it's not a precise proxy to number of miles driven, it is a crude proxy to kind of capture the impacts of weight on our highways. But cars under 10,000 pounds really have de minimis impact on the pavements because we engineer our highways to support those super heavy vehicles. So while it seems like, the big truck should pay more than the little mini or something to that effect, honestly, the roadway impacts are so minimal, it's almost not measurable. So we have chosen to just kind of leave the heavy trucks alone for now and focus on the passenger fleet similar to Hawaii.
There are other
There are
states.
so many good questions. Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
There are other states that are looking at heavy vehicles first or have already looked at heavy vehicles. For example, Connecticut just passed a road usage charge that will go into effect in January of 2022. That will be a rec on heavy vehicles first. And then Oregon actually has in place a weight mile tax where the usage is based on both a combination of weight and the number of miles driven. And so everybody has a different solution, just like some folks are looking at the flat EV fee, others are looking at road usage charge. It really depends on where the state priorities are, where they're concentrated, and just the type of traffic and transportation that they're handling and dealing with.
Thank you. Regarding folks who live in rural areas where they have to just naturally drive further distances, either just for everyday services or for their commute, have any numbers been crunched to determine the difference between the gas tax, compared to the road use charges, increase, decrease? Has anyone done any math on that just to try it out and see how that works?
Yeah, what we found was that in the rural areas, they tend to own a little bit older, less fuel efficient vehicle. So when we actually do the crunching and we assume a revenue neutral road usage charge rate, for the average vehicle in Hawaii, which gets about maybe 22 miles per gallon, some of those rural areas, they actually may pay less in a road usage charge scenario as compared to a gas tax. So it's something that, yeah, does come up quite a bit. And then when you actually crunch the numbers, the less fuel efficient vehicle may end up paying a little bit less.
We've had the same findings in Washington as well. And we actually did a study, as did Oregon, on just looking at VMT of rural versus urban drivers. And while it's not intuitive, we both had similar findings, which was our urban drivers actually put on more annual miles on their vehicle because maybe they're taking a lot more short but frequent trips. While in rural areas, we find that drivers tend to couple their trips because of the distance. They may not be running to the store 3 times a day or doing the errands that you might do because it's convenient and short and close, but those really do add up. And so the total sum effect is urban drivers tend to actually put a little more mileage on their car in totality. But to Scott's point, also, those cars that are driving long distances a day on gas are paying a lot of gas tax to make those trips. They're burning a lot of fuel, and the less fuel efficient your car is, the more you're paying in taxes for those roadways.
So let's flip it. We talked about the rural side of it. Now let's talk about the super urban side. And let's say, excuse me, that you're sitting in traffic for an hour every day. So you're still utilizing the road. However, your mileage isn't ticking. Does that play into any of these scenarios and how that might work?
Well, as far as the road usage charge is based on mileage, so if you're sitting in traffic for an hour but travel only 2 miles, well, you pay 2 miles in road usage charge. But on the other hand, as you're idling in traffic and you're burning the gas, well, you pay the gas tax no matter what, right? So it's something that, yeah, people are aware of. It has come up, but at the same time, it kind of goes back to our point that, well, the road usage charge, you are paying for what you actually use and drive, yeah. So that's something that, as far as everybody pays some fair share and it's based on usage, that's the point that we have been, telling the public.
Thank you. That question actually came up twice here on my list. One of the key themes that we've heard going, from state to state is the need to clearly communicate to people the personal benefits of road use charges. Can you explain, any of you, how you're doing that in Washington and Hawaii? It's going to take a lot of buy-in for people to get on page with this. So what do you do? Where do you start? How do you even begin to test the waters to see what kind of uphill battle is in front of you?
Well, the pilots are critical, and frankly, the pilots are really not to test technical feasibility because we already know it can be done. It's being done in Oregon and Utah and Virginia and more states to come. So it's really not about can we really do this? It's more heavy on the public exposure to it and having that experience with it and seeing in real terms on invoices that show them their miles driven and how much gas tax they paid versus how much rec charges they would have for their driving of their vehicle makes it really very real. And it shows people it's not complicated or hard to participate in. It's not a hassle. It's actually pretty easy. And in a lot of cases, they see a reduction in taxes paid. So it's through that learning and exposure to get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of getting people to understand the difference and the real impacts that it will have on their lives. That also it requires ongoing and extensive public outreach and just talking and presenting to every community group that'll listen to you, to every reporter. And it's an ongoing thing. And until there's a real program in a state, it's, you have to kind of keep that dialogue going with the public in preparation for it. Once a program is authorized, then you really can shift to the specifics of what the program is and doing a pretty extensive public outreach around that. So who's going to be subject to it? What are the impacts? How do I find out? So it's a lot of communication and investing in that time to make sure the public's aware.
Yeah, I totally agree too that, yeah, public outreach, building awareness and all that is important. The bottom line, as somebody pointed out, is that the public want to know what they're getting from all this, right? So it's, having some assurance that, well, if they pay a gas tax or RUC or whatever it is, it's going to go to roadways. And that means it'll be more potholes being patched and less damage to your vehicles and all that. So that part needs to be communicated clearly to the people as far as, what you intend to do with all this, and also, like as Rima said, that you need to help people understand, that what the issues are.
And also, if you take a look at it in terms of first steps, Catherine, you asked how to get started. So even before you start looking at a road usage charge, the simple communication behind this is what we do in transportation. So a lot of Department of Transportations, they have their charge, they do it, they do a great job, but they're not even telling anybody what a great job they're doing. And so if that's not being done, then the public doesn't see and doesn't realize this is what we do. This is why we need money to do what we do. And then if you start at the we need the money conversation, it's almost too late. You're behind the 8 ball already. And so it's kind of an ongoing, communications with the community that needs to happen to get us to the point of let's have a dialogue about how we bridge this gap with our revenue.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. Yeah, so one of the things that we do in Hawaii to help tell the story is that we have actually a website where you can click on it. It brings up a map of all the different islands, and then if you further click on it, then it shows all the projects that we're doing and things like that, so people can see actually where the money is going and being spent on. Yeah, so it's trying to, like as Jingjing point, tell the story of what we're doing, and then we can go into the next topic of, we have this revenue sustainability problem down the road, so yeah, we need to do something. So that's why we're doing this study or project.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. This one is sort of in the weeds logistic question, but I'm frankly curious if in your pilot studies and talking with communities, has there been any concern about the frequency of payment? So for example, for some folks that might be living paycheck to paycheck, they can put $5 in and get $5 worth of gas here and there because they had it at that, at that time, and that's what they have, so that's what they're going to put in, versus getting frequent invoices or charged or automatic, removal of funds, if I'm making any sense. And I'm not really sure if you can send a check in to pay for things or if it's an automatic withdrawal, and some people don't have checking accounts. So how does all that work? How do we ensure that everyone is going to be able to kind of meet the criteria and feel secure in doing it?
Well, part of our current federal research is specifically looking at the impact of RUC on low-income and underrepresented communities, and looking at these potential challenges like, I just want to put $5 on, that's all I have the money for, kind of thing. What do we do if we're in RUC? and what are the mitigation strategies to address these kinds of challenges. So we're going to have more information on that in about a year. But we know right now that by keeping the gas tax in place, which at least for our state, and I think for a lot of states, the gas tax will remain in place for a long time, and it's super, super cheap to collect. So there's really no reason to get rid of it. And it's bundled in the price of fuel today. So it's pretty seamless and painless. But what's happening on the back end is that drivers are getting a credit towards their RUC charges. So if I am a low income person and every time I'm filling up, I'm paying that gas tax, but I'm on the road charge program, I'm getting a credit. So the frequency of payment for the balance that I may owe, which I may not owe anything if I'm driving something that's not very fuel efficient, I may be getting a credit because I'm overpaying in my gas taxes. But if I actually owed, that ability to have incremental or periodic payment is really important for folks. And we really think that is an important piece of an actual program that should be integrated into, is the ability for consumers to decide how they want to pay. Do they want to do automatic payment? Do they want to get a bill? And do they want to pay monthly or quarterly? And what we learned in our pilot is across the spectrum of vehicle type and MTG type, the most we were seeing people accumulating RUC charges after their gas tax credit was, somewhere around $6 to $8 a month. So we're not talking a lot of, like a big bill that someone gets for $500. It was pretty small, and that actually went down for a lot of people. So it kind of kept it in context, I think, for at least in terms of our test drivers and understanding what that impact could be for low income folks. But definitely more work to be done here to determine the kinds of policies and mitigations we can put in place. And we are specifically looking at what a low income RUC might look like. How do we lower that per mile rate for qualifying individuals, for example, that are qualified for other social services? So we're going to be looking at a number of mitigation strategies to help further make it as painless and impactful as possible.
Yeah, I think Rima covered it.
I really like this. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
No, I think Rima covered it perfectly. So yeah, it all goes down to how do you transition, and as far as offering different type of payment options, that's important. But we haven't taken a really deep dive into it. But like a lot of the stuff you mentioned, like, well, not everybody have internet connection easily and checking account and automatic withdrawals, and Hawaii likes to tend to use a lot of paper and check transactions. So yeah, it's something that can get somewhat complicated quickly, but it needs to be looked at more.
Okay, we have to wrap up. It is 2:30 Eastern. So thanks to the Transportation Division for hosting today's session. This is interesting stuff, and it's sort of next wave stuff. So it's really cool to see these pilots in the works, and you're kind of getting some initial data, and this is just, I like this kind of stuff. So thanks to you and Jingjing and Rima and Scott for joining us today. We appreciate your time, your expertise, and all the work that you're doing on this issue. So everyone, reminder, you can log your CM credits for this session. We recorded it. We'll post it up onto our YouTube channel, and we will also have a copy of this slide deck available on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So thanks to all of you for joining us, and we'll talk next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.